this week's GTA 6 o'clock, a new earnings call scheduled for August.
The perfect time to release some screenshots.
Was the story rebooted?
Yeah, I believe it.
And a new concept for the opening mission.
More casual players would have been like, good grief, this is a grind.
It's all here on this week's GTA 6 o'clock.
Hello friends, and welcome to episode 33 of GTA 6 o'clock. We are back to a full squad this week. Yes, Dan is here back in the studio with me, so thank you all for bearing with us last week as I flew solo. I am JJ, and here fresh from I assume finishing Red Dead 2 is Dan Dawkins.
Hello. I unfortunately didn't finish Red Dead 2 because that game is long and I was really not very well. So back and functioning this week.
Well, thank you to all the well-wishers. Quite a lot of people in the comments, Dan, wishing you well.
Thank you. That's very kind. Yeah, thank you so much.
So a few things to catch you up on from last week then, Dan. A few people said that it was a filler episode, which it sort of was, but I don't know what you guys thought the last 30 episodes were. If that was the only filler, maybe we're doing something quite good. Anyway, firstly, JD Waves gave the show's intro last week a 9 out of 10, so he covered that off for you. Thank you, JD. That was very good. A couple of other things that we covered was I Played Everywhere, which was that new game from Leslie Benzi's studio, who's obviously former producer at Rockstar North. Nobody in the comments seemed to care about that, Dan. So we won't talk about that game anymore.
That's kind of amazing. What is that? Just because Benzi's is now dead to us? He's gone, and yes,
I think some of the comments I saw were, "Why are you talking about this? It's not relevant to anything GTA related." The only connection is that he used to work there, so we do not care about his game.
Well, I mean, but he's not like some guy who coloured in 3 cars once upon a time. He's the man who had literally like a Darth Vader style throne room surrounded by televisions. So, I personally have some interest. I guess I wasn't one of the commenters last week, so I'm there we go.
No, I mean, well, if you have any questions, fire them at me. It was the beta test, I think, that I played, so it wasn't the full thing. Maybe once we get it gets up to speed and a lot more people can get hands on it, maybe there's going to be some more interest in it there. The only thing I pointed out was the character creator, which is a big sell for all games, was actually really good.
Oh,
and it might reflect on what GTA Online's character creator could be once 2.0 or whatever we're calling it comes out.
Yeah,
that was probably the main takeaway that I had, which was yes, good character creator. Well done. The rest of it, we'll see.
Well, I have got questions, but I won't ask them now because it seems like nobody cares. But maybe save that for a rainy day.
We'll talk about them later. The only other thing to pick up on then was that apparently I was saying Narcos wrong for the whole show. Dan, I don't think we talked about this off air. I don't think you watched the show either, but we have established that it is Narcos.
I haven't watched the show, and I defer to that piece of information.
So, to catch you up on the final topic we went over last week was that, and I mentioned Narcos because this came about because there have been rumours and reports that originally GTA 6 was going to be a 70s, 80s, 90s style Narcos-themed haven, which got rebooted after Dan Houser left. So instead, all of that content has now come to be in the GTA Online heist, the Cairo Perico GTA Online heist that you can play, which is themed similarly to that. Yeah. So the suggestion is that was content that was going to be made for something and has now been reformatted into something for GTA Online. There was an interview which came out post-launch of that piece of DLC, and Rockstar said that the development for that began in 2020. So if this series of events is correct, allegedly GTA 6 was rebooted around 2019, which would mean that some of this development was started pretty much after that. And they went, how do we rework this content into something else? Well, let's start doing that now and see where we get to. As we've talked about on this podcast, we know that previous GTA 5 DLCs have made their way into GTA Online in the sort of Trevor expansion pack that was going to be him being a government agent, which then got reworked into a GTA Online heist. So it's not too much of a stretch. But to go from that sort of 70s, 80s, 90s style game to what we now know 6 is, do you think that's like too much of a move away, or do you think that like this could have been something that was happening?
Yeah, I believe it. I think only, and this is based on what we know to be true of Rockstar's development history. Jason Schreier, who writes for Bloomberg, used to write for Kotaku, wrote several big Rockstar studio culture articles, one notably back in 2018. I think that was titled Inside Rockstar Games Culture of Crunch. Now this is, and there's another layer to this I'll get to actually, because this is all related. And in that, it talks about, I guess, essentially the furnace working culture of Rockstar, and how difficult it was to create these types of games they create, and how during Red Dead 2, that game underwent several major rethinks and repositionings. And I think that it was described as like a project in stasis, and something that was obviously really profoundly affecting the morale of staff and their mental well-being. As you would expect, if you're working on a game that ludicrously ambitious and detailed, and then someone sort of says, we're going a different way, or thanks for that 2 years of work, we're going to rip it all up. You know, it's a really difficult environment to work in and to stay motivated for. And at a similar time, I think Dan Houser was interviewed saying, we're working like 100-hour weeks, which I absolutely believe from everything I know of Rockstar's then culture. Now, the overlay is 2018, 2019, and officially 2020 is the fracture point in Rockstar. This is when Dan Houser left the studio. Now, before he officially left in like 2020, he'd been on, I don't know how they described it, like an extended internal sabbatical.
Yeah.
So clearly something had gone down internally beforehand, before he officially left. Something had gone down. Now, all of these timings align with Jason Schreier's investigative reporting, talk of potentially big changes in the direction of their key games, I guess Red Dead and particularly GTA, which would have been on running. And like if they'd flipped Red Dead 2 a number of times, I don't know to what extent that was true, like GTA 6 has been in development for, let's say they started on day one of the release of GTA 5, 12 years. It's quite conceivable that they changed their mind a few times and got sufficiently down the road and gone, actually, this isn't working. So, like, I don't know if factually this is true, but like what I would say is a Narcos style, this sounds like a HBO epic, like a Narcos style, gritty 70s. It sounds like something Dan Houser would have championed. And a lot of that is related to, I think, just his age. He's a man of a certain age, probably, late 40s, 50s, who would have grown up with more of an affinity of this type of TV show and movie. And you could see why that might be appealing. Now, I wonder if, and this is obviously speculation on my part, like that kind of prevarication and focus on that storyline left when Dan Houser left, where the team probably went, we don't want to make that type of game and whatever take that had. Who knows what type of game that is or what the message was, where, what is clear now is that GTA 6 has a female lead. It seems to be more, I don't know what the story and themes are, right? We've speculated and we don't know, but I wonder if the studio just said, we want to stand for something different and we want to create something different, and we're going to do that with a clean break. And maybe they've carried some things over, like world building or mechanics or what have you. I don't know. None of us know any of this, but I think the truth of it will all lie, I think, in Dan Houser's departure.
Well, I think that's got us all caught up on the conversations from last week, Dan. So now, today, on to the inevitable countdown to disappointment, as Take-Two has officially scheduled their next earnings call for August the 8th. Now, that's not that exciting in itself, because as we know, these calls always at the same time in the calendar, so this isn't like a new thing. But what it does give us, or me at least, and maybe hopefully some of the listeners, is some hope based on past events, which I can fill you in on right now. If we go all the way back to the GTA 5 days, Rockstar released their first screenshots for the game 8, almost 9 months after the first trailer. Those screenshots came out in July the 12th, 2012, which would mean that an early August date, just before this call, would be the perfect time to release some screenshots, which would also line up with the previous marketing beats for a GTA game. It would also mean, listeners, that we could just be 3 weeks away from some new content. Now, I know we have said that on quite a few previous episodes.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not something to get too excited about, but there is some precedence here. And as you'll remember, those first 2 screenshots for GTA 5 was like a police Maverick helicopter flying above Rockford Hills. And the second one was like a boardwalk at Mirror Park. We didn't know that at the time, but now we know what those things are called and where those things were. After that, the interesting thing is the floodgates then really opened. Just over a month later, in like late August, the 20th, we got 10 more screenshots. And all of this was happening over a year before the game came out. So in my mind, this does track, given what we know about the fall 2025 release date for GTA 6, as revealed in the last earnings call, would put an August date just before this upcoming earnings call around the same time frame to start giving us a couple of screenshots at least, and then maybe more and more as we ramp up towards, we're getting close for it to be out within a year now, which we were saying about 10 episodes ago.
Yeah.
But now things have moved. So I personally think this is now the time where it's maybe more likely that we might get a couple of screenshots in the next 3 to 4 weeks. I don't know what your thoughts on that, Dan? Are you in the same camp as me? Are you a bit further out? Where are we at?
I'm cautiously inclined to agree. I think the first thing to note is that I can't believe it's another earnings call. And I guess this is the point. They're quarterly earnings calls. So we're looking forward to what will be the Q1 2025 earnings call, which will be an update on their finances from March 31st, 2024 to, I guess will be the period at it's like June, let's say, right? So like up to June. So it's a 3-month snapshot of how they're doing as a company. We already know that we've talked a lot on this show about what felt like a unaccounted $1.7 billion of revenue that was previously attached to this financial year, which has now definitely been moved back. And we think that's the GTA 6 thing. So we've got a much clearer view that, GTA 6 is in the next fiscal year. And in all likelihood, since they're missing that Easter window, it's probably going to be like autumn, fall period, we think. Which then will put the game a mere year and 3 months away.
Yeah.
And then you're right. And I think come August, it's probably not too soon to do something like you say, whether it's just as simple as, a drip feed of screenshots or just something to keep poor souls like us from speculating about trailers relayed sideways, as one GTA Twitter account was doing this week. I think that would make sense. And then, like you say, I think we could then quite rapidly see a much bigger rollout of material, perhaps as we enter the tail end of the year, certainly through the next year. So cautiously, I think there could be signs. And I think what's also interesting is, while I don't expect any megaton announcements at all in the financial call, they're so far away from the next financial year. The biggest thing that could happen is it slipped beyond this financial year into, I can't even do my maths, 2026, right?
Yeah.
That would be a huge thing. They're under no pressure to do that. It's so far away. They will get asked by analysts at the end of the call questions, indirect or otherwise, along the lines of, how's GTA 6 going?
Yeah.
And the fun will be reading between the lines on their incredible straight back answers to get any sense of how that's progressing. And I think that will be that's always really fun, because the information is in what's not said or the way things are framed. So I'd look forward to that at minimum. Could we get a little media trickle? Maybe. I'm open to it.
Yeah, I think I'd like to think that it's possible. The interesting thing is the first 2 screenshots we got for 5 you would say, do not give much away.
No.
So I would imagine if we are going to get something, at least the first few screenshots that we get are probably going to be very similar, almost grabs from the trailer type thing, where it's like you can see them not wanting to put out anything that is too, you can't dive into it too much, where it's like, it's a really zoomed out version of the entire city. Like, I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
I think you might get close-ups of like some vehicles that we already know in the game on a street that we haven't seen before, that kind of thing. Exciting nonetheless, but I think it would be hard, at least in the initial batch of screenshots, to be able to start really diving into them and mapping things and it really contributing to like things that we know and how things are going to be positioned within the world and that kind of thing. I might be totally wrong, but I would be surprised if it's going to give away something massive. I think there will be little hints and Easter eggs in them once, if you really, really dive into it, which we will, because we will have weeks to go and look at those screenshots. Indeed. Unless they do the thing that they did with 5 and release a whole bunch more within a month. That would also be amazing. So please also do that. So yeah, lots to look forward to. Approximately 3 and a bit weeks until that earnings call. Will we get screenshots before, on, or around that date? Maybe. Watch this space. And finally this week, Dan, I wanted to cover off a couple of theories that have been floating around for the opening mission and plot points of the game and just get a sense of what we think of them. The first one, I think, has been pretty widely shunned because it's come from an account that isn't all that trustworthy, but it does give us a jumping off point to talk about some things. This was a suggestion that during the first mission, you'll control a male who we would expect to be called Jason, who's following a plane, presumably in a car, that's about to land, and that plane is carrying like a Russian drug dealer who Jason then meets and starts to plan a mission with, goes off to steal some drugs. During that mission, things go a little wrong. They're chased by the police. The drugs fall into the ocean, which opens up a later mission where you have to go and retrieve the drugs from the ocean. All that sounds reasonably feasible. But regardless of how accurate it is, I think it opens up a discussion for us on how the game will start. So do you think that they will open the game and keep it as a single character? Or do you think we're going to be like jumping straight into what we assume to be 2 characters in GTA 6? Now, obviously, 5 opened with Michael and Trevor right at the start in the prologue, and then Franklin was basically introduced within the first mission, and the prologue instantly threw you into the character switching mechanic and all of that stuff. But do you think this will be different, given the fact that some people won't have seen, well, they will try to actively avoid, maybe not trailer 1, but possibly like trailer 2 and 3, so they don't get all the info. So they could come into this game, and I guess some people might not have seen anything, and they'll just buy it for somebody else, give it to someone, and they could be like, oh, I'm going to try this Grand Theft Auto 6 game. They could come into the game seeing it as just a single character experience and then be like, a bit further down the line, oh, I get to play as 2 people. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, like if it will be an instant multi-protagonist story, or they'll try and do a sort of flip where you do a few missions and you're like, I thought that we were going to play as 2 people. Then, oh, there they are. They're an hour in. They've introduced into the game.
It's really hard to tell, isn't it? Like, I could believe Rockstar could do anything. If you look at, and again, I refer to Red Dead, that intro is unbelievably glacial. The star of that intro is snow. It just snows and you sit on a horse while someone waffles on. Nothing happens for at least almost 2 hours.
It
really
doesn't open up into the open world for 2 hours at least.
Easily that. It's really meandering and moody, almost to a fault. I would say to a fault for a lot of more casual players would have been like, good grief, this is a grind. Would Rockstar have the chutzpah to do that again? Maybe. I could believe easily that you just get to see one of the characters and one comes along later. And, in terms of like, is this a good intro? Well, I mean, it's not like he's taken some mind-altering drugs and found his body reborn on the cold side of Mars or anything. It's not like utterly weird or unknowable. It's a man chases a plane with drugs in it, fine. But it could work. And I think the idea of like a mission starting with access to a car is very GTA. Like it likes to give you a vehicle or some driving pretty soon in. So I think that makes sense. Beyond that, it's just it could work. Sure, I don't know if it's a good idea or not. It's all in the execution.
Yeah, I'm like less convinced by the actual events in this opening thing. I think what is interesting is, are we going to just see it from one person's perspective for a while before we get the two characters coming in and interacting with each other? Like, I'm not sure. Like, as we talked about before, that opening mission or that opening, say, half an hour has to teach you and any new players the core mechanics of the game, which does involve, as in GTA 5's prologue, some shooting, some driving, and some character interaction.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's going to have to do regardless. Whether it throws you straight into that and you're instantly in charge of a car, or it does give you a little bit of a build up of like, go and pick a car. Now like Red Dead did with, go pick your horse eventually, and you could choose A, B, or C, grey horse 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah.
They could do that where you pick your vehicle and then you get to drive it about. Gives you a little sense of choice and freedom, but actually it doesn't make that much of a difference. A bit like the Franklin mission at GTA 5 when they're like, which car do you want to get in? It makes no real difference, but you get to be in the red one or the white one.
Yeah.
So I can see them doing something like that. There is also a discussion around like the twist, and does GTA 6 even need a twist? There was an extra comment that I saw that said the twist could be Lucia and Jason are doing these like criminal things, and we know at one point Lucia gets arrested, but then they become sort of disgusted and disenfranchised with the people that they're hanging out with, and they are then flipped to become like the first police of the series. And the comment was that the whole second half of the game is then busting past associates and working wholeheartedly with the law, which would be an interesting thing. And those type of law enforcement missions are not new for Rockstar. Like they've had those kind of things in before. Like the in-game versions of the CIA and the FBI were all over GTA 5. Whether they are like, and we've talked about, one of them could be an undercover cop in this game. Whether that comes into fruition and they actually go wholeheartedly and like, now you are cops and you're doing that kind of stuff. It's difficult because the game is called Grand Theft Auto, and if you're cops halfway through it, you're probably going to be doing less Grand Theft Auto, like less robbing of cars, unless the whole thing is like you're deep undercover and actually you have to keep doing these criminal things to keep up the front.
Yeah,
of,
it didn't hurt the Fast and Furious films.
It did not. All 10 of them.
Yes, they managed to find a way.
So I don't know. Like, do you think pulling back and knowing what we know about 5 and Red Dead, I guess, does 6 even need that kind of twist, or is it just going to be a straight story of, it's got an arc, but it's basically just A to F?
I don't know. What I personally find more interesting is if they use, and we talked about this at length, if they use the dual character mechanic to examine the idea of two perspectives on the same event. And by virtue of doing that, examine the nature of objective versus subjective truth when it's seen through two different lenses, which would tie entirely to the theme of trust and arguably the most divisive issue in the world, in social media, in politics, of we've lost the middle ground and nobody seems to be able to understand or speak to each other. They feel they have felt that's felt like the biggest issue of the age for 5 to 10 years
since the development of the game started.
Yeah, and would be at the point they probably, if they did flip this game for whatever it was going to be in 2018, was the biggest issue then, continues to be the biggest issue now. GTA has always sort of tackled the world as it is, and that to me would be interesting. I guess you could say that maybe The Last of Us 2 beat them to the punch on this in terms of having you play things from different eyes.
Yeah.
But look, films copy each other. It doesn't mean they can't do it because The Last of Us 2 did it. I think there's a different way to look at this, and I think it would be a bolder and more interesting thing. Equally, they could just play it incredibly straight, and GTA 6's thing is just, it looks amazing, it's super fun to play, it's got great mechanics, and it's the test bed for the next GTA Online. So they could play it either way. I wonder, like, now, this is it. It all comes back to Dan Houser. He was so much the supremo of this. With him gone, do they double down and get bolder and more experimental, or will they retrench and sort of play it by committee and go, here's the new, slightly more vanilla GTA 6. It's technically really good on all of these metrics. It's just not as daring. I don't know. You just don't know, do you? You don't know what, like, who's holding the clutch in Rockstar now, and who's ultimately making the decision. I don't know. This is the fascination of it.
I mean, there's so many things that even if it, like, the core story was a bit more straightforward, there's so many people working at that studio with so many ideas that even those, I think, would be served in a whatever becomes Strangers and Freaks, or like side missions and collectibles. Like, those have always traditionally been a bit more out there. Like, we were collecting UFO parts in GTA 5, and Michael went on a drug trip for a while. Like, I think that kind of stuff is definitely still going to be in there. I guess it's just, like, say, whether all of that gets intertwined into the actual main core story, or they just keep that as this is the nice, safe bit, and then we're going to experiment with everything else in and around Miami and Florida and however big those states go. We've seen some of it with the trailer, like even the social media style presentation of people doing crazy and different things. Like, all of that stuff's going to be in there. And I can't see them moving away from that kind of fun sort of side missions, and when you go and meet the weird and wonderful characters of Florida.
All of that will be in there. And I guess as you talk, it just makes me think that, like, a more ambitious story that was truly about perspective and seeing the same thing two different ways, that's just a really hard story to tell. And maybe in a world of this complexity of scale, particularly if you haven't got at the center of the production, I guess, like an auteur or like an autocrat who basically looks at everything, like an author of the entire thing. If the game's ownership is a bit more shared amongst Rockstar, and who has ultimate say on this. But I think to tell a story really ambitious, I feel like it needs at the center of it someone who can be really selfish and ruthless and bring the threads together. And I don't know if that's how Rockstar is structured now.
No, or we're at a situation where that kind of thing is happening, but now it just takes longer. Hence, why we've been waiting so long for 6, and why things are getting pushed back, because it's just like, it is more ambitious, but because it has to go through a couple of different layers of committee, that those decisions just take longer, and we end up with whatever we end up with.
I don't know enough. How many truly daring stories have been told by committee? Like, maybe there's people who are bigger students of television than me could tell me and say, oh, well, this TV series was made by a panel of 6 people and none of them were in charge. I just wonder how true that is. Even the MCU, ultimately, and it's obviously the MCU's gone off the rails, but while it was good, it was all threaded through, or certainly the illusion of it was, through Kevin Feige. And the idea that there's somebody with his hand on the tiller, or her hand on the tiller, making it happen. I just wonder if what that is at Rockstar now.
Well, there we go then, Dan. Thank you very much for coming back. Thank you for getting better. We've finished another episode of GTA 6 O'Clock. Please let us know your thoughts about any of those topics in the comments below. Get in touch with us on Twitter at GTAVI O'Clock, and please send us any emails at gtavioclock@gmail.com. We will be back next week at 6 o'clock, surprisingly. So we will see you then for another episode of GTA 6 O'Clock.